Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here to sift through those sources you send and turn all that complex info into something clear, something you can actually use. So today, we're really digging into strategy, being proactive. Turkey season's wrapping up for many folks. And, well, if you're a landowner, maybe dreaming about attracting those, big toms the off season, that's actually when the real work kicks off. It's not just about packing up the hunting gear. It's more like grabbing the tools, maybe even some blueprints for your property. Our mission here is pretty straightforward. Give you specific, actionable steps. We're pulling from the best practices and the materials you shared. And the main idea, the core philosophy really, seems to be this integrated management approach. Like the sources keep saying, creating that perfect turkey spot. It's not about one giant fix. It's described as a culmination of small parts. So we're going to tackle four main areas, all connected. Predator control, strategic food plots, getting the right coverage, and then maybe one folks don't think about as much, timber management.
That's exactly right. That holistic view is really crucial. And it's why doing this deep dive now makes so much sense. We need to shift our thinking a bit, not just watching the wildlife, but actively shaping the environment for them. That's the real difference, isn't it? Between just hoping turkeys show up and making sure your property is the place they want to call home. And for that, you need a really solid, nuanced understanding of why these things work, starting maybe with the biggest threat to a new generation of turkeys.
Yeah, that was honestly the thing that jumped out at me right away. You picture a turkey, right? Big bird, seems tough. But the research actually points out they're, quote, essentially defenseless to anything bigger than a bug, which is, wow, that kind of vulnerability means they're hunted constantly. And not just by the obvious predators.
What's fascinating here is it's not primarily about adult birds getting hunted, though that happens. The real damage, ecologically speaking, comes from nest predation.
Right.
You look at the numbers. The overwhelming majority of eggs in
Yeah.
those tiny young poults, they're lost to critters raiding the nest.
Hmm.
So if you're not actively doing something about that, especially before nesting season ramps up, well, you're basically losing the next generation before they even get a chance.
Okay, so just hoping the bushes hide them isn't going to cut it. We need to be, like, actively removing those specific threats. What does the material actually recommend for landowners who want to, really boost their flock's survival rate?
Well, the main recommendation is really a combination of active control methods,
Yeah.
specifically hunting and maybe even more importantly, trapping. You got to target the most effective nest raiders.
Correct.
And when you look at the list of common predators mentioned, bobcats, coyotes, hawks, and especially raccoons, each one needs a slightly different strategy. Raccoons, for instance, they come up again and again as maybe the most effective nest predator. They're just really good at finding nests. So effective trapping, particularly late winter, early spring, that's often your best bet for managing their numbers locally.
Before the hens are even thinking about laying.
Exactly. That timing detail is huge. You want to reduce that pressure before the nets are vulnerable. Now, coyotes, that might be different, maybe focusing more on, say, disrupting their denning areas or being strategic about where young broods might be moving. It's specific knowledge. That's what makes predator control successful.
Okay, that makes sense. Focus the effort before nesting. So let's say we've worked on securing the perimeter, reducing the immediate threats. Now we need to think about the amenities, right? Like, make sure that when a hen does pick a spot, it's like a five-star hotel with a great buffet. Which brings us straight to the dinner plate, the strategic food plots.
Absolutely. You've got the defense. Now you need the nourishment, the retention. Putting in or improving food plots is often called one of the best things you can do. It makes your property kind of indispensable to the birds.
And it's interesting, it's not just about putting out feed, is it? It's got this dual benefit. Like, yes, the turkeys eat the seeds and the greens you plant. That's direct nutrition.
Right, supplemental feed.
But maybe even more critical, those plants attract insects, little invertebrates. And the turkeys feed heavily on those too, which really bumps up the protein, right? Especially for the poults, the young ones growing fast.
Exactly. That high-quality nutrition is what helps you achieve the main goal here. Keeping the birds in that general area, making your land their home base, essentially. But here's a really interesting tactical point the research brings up. Size. Or maybe it's distribution that's more important than just sheer size.
So you mean don't just plow up one massive 10-acre field and plant it all in one go?
Precisely. Yeah, avoid that temptation. A single large plot can actually make them more vulnerable. Easier targets for hawks or coyotes. Instead, what a lot of successful managers do is create smaller plots, maybe only an acre, sometimes even less, and they spread them out. disperse them across the property.
Okay, like little feeding stations scattered around.
Exactly. It spreads out the flock, makes individual groups less obvious targets. And it means birds never have to venture too far from safe cover to get a meal.
That makes a lot of sense, like having several little neighborhood grocery stores instead of one giant supermarket way out on the highway.
So what kind of groceries are we stocking? The sources list some popular ones. Peas, buckwheat, millet, clovers. Why those specifically? Any reason?
Well, those tend to be good choices because they provide accessible nutrition at key times. Clovers, for example, they're really attractive. They offer good green forage, sometimes even when it's cooler. They can be almost a year-round draw.
Millet and buckwheat, they produce great seeds.
Hmm.
Easy for turkeys to find and eat when they're foraging on the ground. But, and this is really the crucial caveat, you absolutely can't skip this part, the specific plants you choose. That needs serious research. It has to be based on your land, your geography, your soil type, the climate.
But what works down south might be useless up north.
Totally. What thrives in, say, Alabama
Hmm.
might just completely fail in Wisconsin. So
Right.
you've got to tailor those plots to your specific location and the time of year. That's what turns them from just feed into, like, highly effective attractants.
Okay, tailored food plots. And if we're making these nice little feeding stations effective
Yeah.
and safe, that brings us right back to safety.
Shelter. The sources are really consistent on this. They call coverage one of the single most important things you can have on your land.
Yeah, it really ties everything else together, doesn't it? Good cover, the right kind and amount, it does two critical things. First, obviously, it keeps the birds safe from those predators we talked about earlier. It gives them places to nest securely, escape routes.
Second, and this is just as important, having enough good quality cover. It's a massive draw in itself. It makes your land way more attractive to turkeys looking for a safe place to set up shop. Security is like top priority for them.
So when a landowner is thinking about planting stuff for cover, are we talking like buying shrubs from a garden center, or is it more specialized?
The advice strongly leans towards using native grasses and other indigenous plants, things that naturally belong there.
Makes sense.
They're already adapted, right? Usually need less maintenance. And they provide the kind of structure that wild turkeys actually evolved with and rely on. And certain elements are really key, like dense, almost thorny protective thickets. The research mentions things like greenbrier.
Oh, yeah, greenbrier can be thick.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And other tough ground cover plants that create real physical barriers. Turkeys need that kind of dense stuff for nesting. Just an open, grassy field that's not going to cut it against a raccoon or a hawk. And again, the type of dense cover might differ depending on where you are geographically. But that principle of dense native protection, that's constant.
Okay, native, dense ground cover. Got it. Now, here's where it gets really interesting for me, because we've been very focused kind of on the ground level, right? Food plots, ground cover. But the sources bring up this idea that managing the trees, that canopy timber management might get overlooked, but it's totally crucial. Like if you miss this, you could undermine all the other work.
Oh, absolutely. It's like the fundamental infrastructure for their habitat, especially for roosting at night. There was one quote that really hit home for me. Good timber management is key for turkeys. Without it, you won't hold turkeys on a property. That's pretty definitive. It suggests, even if your food plots are perfect, your ground cover is amazing. If the overhead structure isn't right, the birds just won't stay long term.
Okay, so what does right look like for a turkey forest? It's not just any old patch of woods, is it?
No, definitely not. They have specific needs. They need mature timber. We're rocking pines, hardwoods, or ideally a good mix of both. Why mature trees? Because they provide those sturdy, high limbs. That's what they need for safe roosting at night, away from ground predators. So if your forest is just like young, skinny saplings, the sources say that simply won't be enough. They need height and structure for that nighttime security.
Right. Makes sense. But the research also stressed that you can't just leave an old forest alone and assume it's perfect forever. It mentioned diversity, maintenance, needing active management.
Exactly. That's where the proactive landowner comes in again.
Yeah.
You should actually be planting new trees, thinking long term. Ensure you always have that cycle of mature roosting sites coming up for future generations. But beyond just planting, the sources highlight a couple of key active management techniques. They might sound a bit complex, but they're incredibly effective.
Okay, I'm listening. What are they?
Well, first is selective harvesting, thinning out certain trees. And the goal isn't just getting timber, it's ecological. By carefully removing some trees, you open up the canopy, let more sunlight reach the forest floor.
Ah.
And that sunlight, It encourages the growth of all those good ground level plants we just talked about, the native grasses,
Yeah.
the thickets that provide food and nesting cover right under the roost trees.
Yeah.
So it's a targeted way to boost the ground floor. And the second method, which is often, well, more dramatic, is using prescribed burns.
Prescribed burns. Okay, yeah, that definitely sounds intense. For listeners who might not be familiar, how does setting a controlled fire actually help turkeys? Seems counterintuitive.
It does sound a bit like that, yeah.
Hmm.
But it's basically like hitting the reset button, ecologically speaking. Done correctly, it's a low-intensity fire. It burns off the accumulated leaf litter, the dead stuff on the ground, maybe some undesirable undergrowth, but it doesn't harm the big, mature trees. So it opens up the ground layer, clears things out. And then crucially in the spring, you get this flush of fresh, tender, nutrient-rich new growth. And that new growth is incredibly attractive to turkeys for foraging. Plus, it helps maintain those open, park-like areas they seem to prefer for visibility. It's definitely an advanced tool, requires expertise, but it's mentioned over and over as really key for long-term sustainable management.
So, what does this all mean? It really hammers home that integrated approach, doesn't it, across all four things we talked about.
Yeah.
Building that perfect turkey haven, it's clearly not about finding one magic solution. It really is that culmination of multiple small integrated efforts, everything from knowing why you'd plant clover versus millet, all the way to these, pretty intensive management actions like trapping raccoons before nesting season or carefully thinning timber to help the plants on the ground. It all has to work together.
It absolutely reinforces that core conclusion from the sources. Yeah. If you want those big toms to not just visit, but to live there, to stick around,
Yeah.
you've got to address everything. The food, the safety from predators, the nesting shelter on the ground, and that crucial overhead cover for roosting, all at once. If you ignore one piece, maybe you skip the predator control, or you don't think about the roost trees, it could basically undermine everything else you're trying to do. Which leads to maybe a final thought, a question for you, the listener, to kind of chew on, building on all this. If these specific techniques, things like targeted timber harvesting, promoting native grasses, even using prescribed fire if they're so essential for attracting and holding game birds like turkeys, what are the broader, maybe longer-term ecological benefits these practices might offer your land? Beyond just the hunting success. Think about what they might mean for, say, soil health or water retention, erosion control, maybe overall biodiversity on your property. Years down the line, something to consider.
Definitely something to mull over as you maybe start planning that off-season work, maybe while putting on those muddy boots. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into getting your land ready for the next big tom. We'll catch you next time.